Our guest today is Biz Thompson, who is a reformed high school English teacher now serving as a middle school librarian in Framingham, Massachusetts. In this episode, we apply a step-by-step unit planning protocol to dream up a new unit. Let's get to the episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-creating curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Biz, welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you here. I am curious to know if there is anything like right when we're jumping into the conversation that you want to share with folks who might be listening or reading the blog post version of this conversation that's like maybe the either impetus for our conversation or context for maybe some of the ideas you'll share, books you'll share about today?
Sure. So I'm a school librarian in Framingham, Massachusetts. I was a high school English teacher for 8 years before I transitioned into my role as a middle school librarian. So I come from like maybe more of the teacher lens than other librarians do. And I learned about you from our fabulous Framingham teen librarian, John Garrigan.
Amazing. Oh, I'm so excited. As a fellow like high school literacy and social studies teacher, I'm very excited to.
Yes.
Oh, so cool. Okay. So if we are going to take the approach of kind of brainstorming a unit or like something
Yep.
that maybe a high school or middle school or whoever ELA teacher might be able to actually do in their class,
Mhm.
I would love to start with maybe what you would like in this, or what you envision students to be like learning or pursuing through reading, through text, through books. And I often ground this in things like the 3 parts of Goldie Muhammad's framework. So she talks about like identity, how will my instruction
Mhm.
help students learn something about themselves or others? She talks about criticality, so disrupting power and oppression and like kind of
Oh,
navigating
okay.
conversations with that. And or joy, just like how do we find joy in right? Like those are 3 very different things. So we could focus
Yes.
on anywhere your brain takes you as you kind
Sure. Yeah. Um, I feel like it's really hard to find joy in the text that we choose for middle schoolers and high schoolers. There's not a lot of joy out there, is there? In things that are considered to have literary merit, there isn't. It's usually dark themes. Um, it's actually kind of hard to find texts that are truly joyful. Um, What's been interesting in my time in Framingham is so I was working at the high school. It was basically like we had a book room and there were books, and then you would build the unit around the book. And so much of that is shifting. And in the last curriculum redesign we did, our focus was on building background knowledge and not necessarily in the literacy or in the, all those things that you just mentioned. But I find that I look to identity a lot when I'm thinking about books because for middle schoolers and high schoolers, they're finding out who they are. And that's where we always inevitably end up, no matter what types of texts we're choosing. Um, and so that kind of becomes hard in a place like Framingham, where a lot of the students in my school, not necessarily in every school, are from South America. They're from Brazil. And there really aren't a lot of texts that center around even South American children, families. So it's really hard to match identity perfectly with them. And I think we've also talked a lot about in our learning spaces that some of the, even if we're looking at them like a Latin American text, right? If we can't get to South America, that we're looking for texts that don't pigeonhole or focus on harmful stereotypes, which can be difficult to do. So there are some instructors who will look at a book about, students crossing the border and say this is relevant, and it is. But we're at a point where we also have students who just like go to school and have families and do the regular things that teenagers do without all of that too. And there's not as much representation in that space, I think. And I've also worked sometimes with I have a 10-year-old who's in fifth grade, and she goes to a Montessori school, and we'll run ideas back and forth too. So like they've been working on topics of like inclusion and thinking about cognitive differences, physical differences, and how to learn and create empathy there. And so we'll bounce titles back and forth, which is kind of fun. But then it's always like the teachers and I are like reading all the books as fast as we can. And I think there also has to be good writing, right? We can have joyful books. We can have we can have books that sort of capture identity, but if they're not well written, they're not coming from a soulful place. The kids know that, and they don't care for it very much.
I love that idea of becoming from a soulful place being like the thing that students
Yeah.
connect with. Like, yes, amazing.
Yes, we learned about Holden Caulfield. We know who the ponies are still.
That's so good. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I also just love so I also live in Framingham and just like the very like high Brazilian population, like wanting to
Mhm.
name that, like, you want to be able to like see yourself where and put yourself in that position of like,
Mhm.
I can identify with those main characters. And then if you don't
Mhm.
have texts that are translated to English that are either written by Brazilian authors or, centered in Brazil or like having
Mhm.
a Brazilian American identity, like, it's like, okay, right. The how do we find something that's general, not oppressive, and still
Yes.
connected, right? This is like such a multifaceted kind of thinking about
Yes.
identity that's so important. So I just appreciate you naming it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like in some ways publishing is so far ahead of where it was when I was a student, when so many of my colleagues were students. But sometimes like educators will presume that there's something there that isn't there yet, right? Even in nonfiction, like we need nonfiction books that don't have the lexile of like high school for middle schoolers. We need to look beyond. While I love like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, there are other people that that are important um, to us, right? That we need to be writing about. And I feel like publishers look to the same people and they just publish like book after book about those people or those experiences. And we're not like branching out so much.
So true. So true. I'm curious to know, is there a particular like question that you find interesting for students to grapple with around either identity or just like reading books in general, or like to your point about building background knowledge? Is there
Mm.
kind of a framing question that comes to mind if we were to like brainstorm this out?
Yeah, I think like oh, there's a student. I think usually when we're designing units in particular, we do have sort of a central question. So I keep thinking of when we were redesigning the eighth grade curriculum. So our eighth graders read the memoir Night by Elie Wiesel. Um, and they had also traditionally read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And we revisit To Kill a Mockingbird frequently because, um, we have the white savior story there, and there's some, harmful language that sometimes students of color have not been so comfortable with. And I think our teachers do a great job of acknowledging that and sort of working through it and talking about that. Um, And it was interesting, we were thinking of pulling it one year, and I teach, like, a flexible class, and the students in there, I asked them, like, "Should we keep this book? Should we not? Like, this is what the conversations are." And most of them actually said, "It's great, we should read this, but we need to read it with this lens." So we've incorporated, Just Mercy, nonfiction, the young adult version, to sort of tell lots of sides of that story of like justice, right? And all of that's very heavy. And so we were looking for a book to start the year that captured identity, and we landed on Don't Ask Me Where I'm From by Jen De Leon. And she's from Framingham. And when I read her book, it really resonated as like honest to me, right? This was an amalgamation of her experiences as a Guatemalan American growing up in Framingham, of her experiences teaching students in Boston. Um, and the book deals with, Metco and what that looks like, and microaggressions and things like that. And so I think when the teachers are working through that unit, they're looking for students to make those personal connections and build their background knowledge. They learn a little bit about Metco. Um, they talk about sort of like microaggressions, about code switching, things like that. And it also, I think, maybe gives vocabulary that they might not have for those experiences that they're probably having all the time in the world. And I think it's a way for the kids to get to know each other and to understand what their spaces are. And there are some activities that students do. So in the book, the characters, there's sort of like a Mean Girls moment where they have this like full school like assembly to deal with some of the racial incidents that have been happening. And there's been all this documentation about like building the wall on the border, right? So the students decide to subvert it by creating a wall, but then everyone puts sort of like their own kind of experience in school, what they want people to know. And some of our teachers have started doing that sometimes when they read the book. And it's really eye-opening to see that like it tends to be the moment when students say the quiet part out loud. They share the thing that like people might presume about them, but isn't true. To sort of defy those stereotypes. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And when we first designed the kids were like, oh, this is great. And now because it's in school, they're kind of like, oh, this is like just okay. And I'm like, it's not like, I don't know, Chaucer. This is as close to you as we're getting right now. I forget what your original question was, but but that's sort of mind when we're thinking about how do we frame units and how do we weave identity in and all that good stuff.
Oh my gosh, I love all of the pieces of that, all of the multitude of books that cover different aspects of identity, and like to embed that kind of like disruption and building the background knowledge. Like you're kind of like taking us through all of the nuances of all the
Yeah.
pieces, which I love. The
Yeah.
initial question was just kind of like, is there a question that frames all of it, like an essential question?
Yeah. I think from the educator standpoint, not necessarily from the student standpoint, the question we were asking ourselves is when we are going into material like the Holocaust, like the justice system, and students are also learning civics now at the same time. So they're learning about the legal system, about how our government works. How can we get them there from a place that is closer to where they are, right? Because I think teachers were finding that when they just had to jump into the Holocaust after reading like Telltale Heart or whatever, there wasn't a community built in the classroom that allowed students to be safe talking about really hard things, right? Because we are also going to have students who have family members who survived the Holocaust, who, are practicing Jews who might still feel very strongly about the content of the book. And it's awful. Like it's really hard to read, and you need to have a community in place, and you need to have some safety with each other in order to do that. And so I think we were trying to center it in their own identity and kind of like build towards, okay, then we're going to move on to these really tough, hard topics together.
Two things I want to lift up from that. One is kind of, right, there's
Sure.
like kind of this base building of the foundational trust and community that has to happen as part of the unit or prior to the unit, because otherwise you're not going to get what you need out of it, right? Students will
Yep.
have a harmful experience or something, right? And then the other one, I'm thinking, I know you shared the teacher lens, right? As like, get them to get there as close as they are as possible. Like, I was thinking the student lens of that, or like the essential question of that student facing might be like, how do we like heal together? Because
Oh yeah. Yep.
right, it's almost like you're showing, I'm just thinking like, right, like with the Holocaust, with like To Kill a Mockingbird, there's harm in there. Just Mercy, it's all about like the harm of the structures and the systems. The school assembly, or like the wall piece that you were saying from Don't Ask Me Where I'm From, like there's all these confrontations of harm, and then it's like, how do these communities we're learning about, but also how do we as a school community, as a class,
Yep.
like heal together? Because ultimately
Yeah.
we don't want to sit in the oppression. We want to like move
Yeah,
through it
yeah,
and
move past
repair.
it. Yeah, with our voice, with our own voices, not somebody else's. Yeah.
Yes, I love the
Yeah.
element of student leadership and youth leadership in that, what
hmm
point you just
hmm
made. So
hmm
I love that. I'm almost wondering, is there something that either you did when you did the curriculum revamp or that you're thinking now as we're talking through that would be like a kind of culminating project or activity that students are kind of putting all these pieces together into some sort of like civic action or like community piece?
Yeah, well, there is something kind of naturally embedded, not in their English language arts class, but in their social studies class. So every eighth grader is tasked with completing a civics project. I think what would be great actually was if there was space for the ELA teachers and the social studies teachers to align and kind of look at what they've studied so far in ELA to try and focus there. And I think the civics project was rolled out in the 2020 school year. So they're still figuring out how to do it. So I don't want to fall. I had to teach civics then too. So I get it. Um, but I think if like down the road, if there were collaboration time, that would be a great way to put those two things together. There have been in what I've taught in eighth grade enrichment class, so students who are sort of like above grade level, where we've worked on some community advocacy. Like I've asked them, like, when you look around, what do you think needs to be better? And then we try to find the points of contact or find, and students have had like meetings with the superintendent and things like that. And it's not always related to like exactly what they're reading, but it is related to building that voice. And it's funny, like sometimes they'll be like, well, we need to change the time of school. And then we'll go down and they're like, actually, that's kind of impossible. But that's learning, right? You know, like, and it's in their hands. It's very hard for me, but sometimes I try to take a step back. And I haven't had a chance to do that in a while, but I look forward to doing it again. So.
I love all the whole process of that, right? Like, so to be able to identify the issues and draw those parallels to what they might be
hmm
reading. I love the interdisciplinary nature of
Yeah.
like ELA social studies
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the civics piece being like that project is such a nice organic way of like, you're
hmm
already doing this. What can you learn from or pull
Yeah.
from the text? And then
Yeah.
I love the goal of building voice that you named and also just that it is hard, that it's not easy, and that to really develop youth leadership, we have to just confront those challenges and
hmm
get familiar with them. And we also have to
Yeah.
have, it sounds like you do at Framingham, have the audience that's authentic from the adult perspective. Like we're willing to meet with you, share the
Yeah.
restrictions, talk through
hmm
and kind of problem solve together. So I do
hmm
think that's like I'm just thinking of foundational, if you're teaching something like this, right? These are like kind of foundational community wide
hmm
things to just make sure, because you don't want the students to go into the superintendent and then the superintendent's like, I don't have time for this. Right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, I think as when I have the occasion to sit in with teachers and they're developing assessments and things, I try to, and as a high school teacher, I wasn't very good at doing this. But just I find when students are each other's audiences, the quality of the work is better than when they think they're just submitting something to a teacher. If it's public, if it's an audience of your peers, I think that automatically sort of brings a level of persistence that might not be there if you're like, oh, the same adult is going to read this again and I'll just submit it and they'll tell me how I did. And that's the end of
Yeah, the authentic audience and project so
it.
critical. Yes, like to have an assignment feel like there's some real weight behind it and like
Yeah. Yeah.
tool
hmm
change can happen.
hmm
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really
So
good.
you remember to like put a period at the end of your sentence or whatever.
Yeah. Yes. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. I like I'm loving all of these pieces. I'm curious to know if there's any like ELA teacher activities that you particularly enjoy to have students almost like on a smaller level, like when engaging with
Mm.
text, be each other's audience or be each other's like thought
Mm.
partners and like I don't know if it was like literature circles or Socratic seminars. I'm trying to think of some of the protocols of like how do we get students to engage and kind of learn from each other versus like the teacher directed learning,
Yeah,
right?
yep. I used to more often, sometimes when classes, so the seventh graders used to do like dystopian literature circles, and I would get to facilitate some of them. And some teachers have like amazing, and they do it at my daughter's school too, where role assignments, so someone's the historian and, and it's so great when you have kids who are really like well prepared to sit back and just watch them. He's not here anymore, but we had a great teacher, Andrew Ahern, who his lit circles were something to behold. Like sometimes I'd just be sitting there and like be like, these kids they just got that on their own. Like, this is amazing. They were reading Ghost by Jason Reynolds, which I love. And I was like, well, I actually never thought about that. They were like 11-year-olds. But I think for our students, there's a lot of skill that is required to get to that place. And I think just situations and framing have made it so that we're really focusing on building those skills back. So I think we've sort of like, we did these things and now we kind of have to build those skills back, whether it's language skills or self-monitoring or whatever. Some kids are ready for that and others need some more help. But when they get there, it's like so amazing to watch. And my daughter's school does a lit circle at the end of the year where they invite parents in to participate with them. And again, it's so great because like the kids are smarter than us for sure. And it's interesting, like at my daughter's school, what was the book we read? We read a book, I can't think of the name, but I'll email you, but about a student who was sort of nonverbal, but very, very bright. And she struggles to sort of get what she needs in school. And my husband and I were explaining that when we were in school, we never would have seen a student like that. They would have been like closed off in a separate part of the school. And the younger kids were like, well, why didn't you make friends? So we were like, we should have, but there wasn't any infrastructure where we would cross paths. And isn't it great that now you understand that that's the right thing to do, right? And it's so hard to get, like, as kids get older, it's harder to get parents to come in, but I would love to do that. And in fact, I'm going to start back up again after the pandemic, our staff book club. So sometimes we read YA. I have to send out a Google form to get it sent out, but sometimes we historically read middle grade and YA, and then I might integrate adult books because then they get, we have those conversations with each other and then can extend them to the kids if they see the book on our desk or whatever. I went in a lot of directions.
Oh my gosh, no, now I'm like, let's talk about the staff book circles. But yeah, like so many cool things about this. I just love the idea of like, I mean, I'm just thinking of like a unit arc that, right, where we're talking about like, how do we, we're guided by the question of like, how do we heal together, right? I'm sure there are so many entry points for students to your point of like, people are coming in different ways. And I'm sure linguistically, there's like different like rates of expression and in terms of English. And like, I just think there's so many opportunities to either, verbalize and translate because there are other peers that maybe have the Portuguese background and like a higher English proficiency at the time. I taught in a high school with students with like 30 different languages and they were all new to English. So it's like having people who are in the same class who speak the same home language as you or first language is really helpful. And so, I'm thinking being able to access that, or like if you're written or verbal literacy is like one of those is higher, just giving multiple access points for whether you're sharing verbally or in writing, like a gallery walk or something. I think there's probably so much opportunity for people to grapple with that question, even before getting to the texts.
Oh, right? Yeah.
And then being able to see like, how do the characters, how do the people in the stories and the novels and the nonfiction, like, how are they grappling with this question? It'd be such a nice, like, motivating launching point as like a hook for the unit, right? And then having maybe the base be some sort of central text about like, I don't know, I'm envisioning like UN Declaration of Rights or like something, right, that's like central to justice.
Yeah. One of the 8th grade ELA teachers looks at that with her students when they're reading To Kill a Mockingbird. Yep, for sure.
Okay. That's beautiful.
In Night, actually, no, with Night, I think they look at that. And we've really tried, especially, I think because I helped with the curriculum planning for that group and the teachers have stayed the same. We've been able to do some pretty neat things with trying to bring that text to life. So one of our 8th grade teachers, Miss Latine, has a relative who works for who's like the ACLU or something, and she had him come and talk to the class after this was a few years or maybe 2 years ago, after the students read To Kill a Mockingbird and Just Mercy. We invited the Framingham police to come in and do round circle discussions with the students, which was actually like wonderful. We were very scared about how that was going to go. And students asked really pointed questions. Like one student came in, and the chief of police is wonderful. He's really the best. um, and he said, like, where do you stand on Black Lives Matter? Like, first question right off the bat. And the chief was like, I am in absolute solidarity. I almost quit my job after I saw the George Floyd, and hearing that from the students was just like so eye opening. I think because, especially in the public, like, kids have these, and it's fair, they have these perceptions of the police, and Just Mercy, paints a lot of injustice in the justice system. And some of the teachers were like, well, this is one, like we have to round out the discussion. um and so we just had these classroom based discussions, and the kids would ask, even just like questions like, how fun is it to ride in a patrol car? But it was good, like relationship building and community building. And fortunately, the Framingham PD, especially the people at the top who come here, have like one, the lieutenant, I think, is like a trained social worker. And there are a bunch of people who like went through Framingham public schools who like know all our staff when they come in, who it's sort of like you're looking at yourself, like I was this kid too. um we have a Holocaust survivor come and speak to the students after their reading night. So we've really been trying to do these things, and of course that's not always so student centered, right? But trying to round out the experience. But I think that's what we need to get back more often, is like more deep thinking, more critical thinking, more connection building between disciplines and ideas, and within like the arc of your ELA year. Because I think sometimes we get lost in the like multiple choice questions, and it's always more engaging if you're using your brain with other students, with the outside world, and making those connections.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I'm hearing so much community building and like community tapping into community expertise and like the guest
Mm-hmm.
speakers and things.
Mm-hmm.
That is so cool. I'm kind of wondering, one of the things that I usually ask at the end of these like kind of like unit
Mm-hmm.
dreaming episodes is like, what is the thing that you think will help, like a teacher who went and like teaches this, right? This the use
Mm-hmm.
unit like this. Like how do you see that being, or how was it for you being, the best kind of teacher version of yourself in that moment, right? Like, or like thinking about the kind of fulfillment it brings you to be able to kind of facilitate those connections. And I'm just thinking of the kind of, I guess the question is maybe about the value of this, not to just students, but to educators as well who are engaging in this work.
Yeah, so our two eighth grade ELA teachers are just like really exemplars. One of them works for Facing History. He's been on the board, and he just does such a brilliant job of like scaffolding and building and pulling out like pieces of nonfiction, and and really walking along with students as they're sort of learning about the Holocaust, building background knowledge. My roommate here, and with like a very like sensitive lens, if that makes sense. He's really an expert in that regard, and we also collaborate. All three of us collaborate very well together. And his counterpart, Emily Latine, is like, she could whip up the greatest lesson in like 15 minutes, and it would be greater than anything I had ever taught. Like, she gets all the accommodations, all the adjustments for language capacity, visuals, like the most beautiful slides, like perfectly organized and sensical like worksheets to accompany. She'll do like roundtables where students are walking around and looking at images, and silent conversations. Just between the two of them, they are able to capture like all the humanity that's necessary, all the background knowledge building, and the sort of like making everything as accessible as possible. And I think they're really the magic. Then they come to me and I just step in and say like, well, we could add this, I'm like the car salesman. They really do the groundwork in like a super beautiful way. And they will also be the first to acknowledge when something isn't working and see what they can do to make it work better. And I think that's always the key. I mean, this is nothing nobody knows, but there's nothing wrong with saying like, this isn't working anymore. We need to take a new approach. Or I found this thing that now is better than what we did before. And I think openness to that is also super important.
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share the freebie for this episode, which is a link to a website called Facing History, which uses history to challenge teachers and students to stand up for justice. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaywithlyons.com/186. Now back to the show.
I love that. I love that you get to collaborate with awesome colleagues. And I also think the PSA embedded in that message is like, talk to your librarian for those ideas of like, right, where do we go with this? This text is getting old. Give me some ideas.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that, everyone's so busy. I understand that as a classroom teacher, but I often advertise, I'm like, I didn't have time to read books when I was an ELA teacher. I didn't. I could read like I was grading papers. I was doing all this crazy stuff. Like I didn't have time to read. And so I look at school library journals. So even if I haven't read it, like I know what's out there. I know what's good and not good for our students too, right? Like, because sometimes what critics think is good is like not at all what the kids here care about, right? So I often advertise like, you need nonfiction to support that lesson. I'll let me do it. You don't have to spend your time doing it. You need someone in the community to come. I'll do that. I'll do that work for you. So yeah, I mean, definitely, if you have a good librarian, use them because I love it. And like, I'm such a nerd. People are like, I don't want to bother you. I'm like, no, this is my favorite thing to do. You're not bothering me at all. I love this to my core.
I love it. I so love it. And actually, yeah, if people want to like get in touch with you, connect with you, if they don't have relationships with their librarian, if they ask you a question.
Well, I don't want to cause drama. I don't want to be the drama.
If people are curious to know like some of the things you're working on, is there a place that they could reach out to you or just see the work that the middle school's doing?
So what's hard is that the school district decided to change the whole district's web presence this weekend. So,
but we can link later to the
exactly. Yeah. So there is a link to my library page, but it's sort of like the corporate school district stuff. But my email is there. And also I think other credit too, to go back to John Garrigan and I started at the same time. And a lot of people, like my roommate there was just saying like, how does he, because he comes in to our schools like once a month or whatever and sets up a table and the kids know him, and she was like, how does he get that to happen? But it's so natural, like it's just so we work together so nicely that even I'll go to him and be like, okay, what manga do I need? What do you think about this? So also your public librarians can be very, very helpful. If you don't have school librarians in your school, get to know your public librarians because they can be super helpful too. And especially as a community resource, because they also know everybody.
I love that because I actually didn't even know until I was on the Framingham Library page as like a patron of Framingham Library. Yeah. I did not know that there was a teen person, like a specialist who specializes in teen reading.
And there's a children's specialist, right? Amazing. So the children's specialist will go to the elementary schools and help them like with summer reading or they'll do activities or like they're really wonderful. Yeah.
Gosh, that is so cool. You are a wealth of information and knowledge. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with us today. And I'm so excited for listeners to learn all of this from you when the episode airs. So thank you.
I'm trying. I'm by no means a model. I'm just showing up.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.